Kaya identity has been developed. This Kaya identity has been developed as a tool to understand and measure CO2 emissions and their underlying factors. This can be used to identify which factors can be leveraged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And it also plays a core role in the development of future emission scenarios. What will happen in the next 20 years, 30 years, or 50 years in the future emissions. So to reduce CO2 emissions, we need to reduce the factors on the right side. So there are basically four terms here: population, GDP per population, energy per GDP, and the ratio of CO2 emissions and energy. So how do you really reduce CO2 emissions? So let's take first a look at population. So basically population is just the refer to the number of people, as you all know. So if we have more population or higher number of population, therefore we are expecting to have more energy consumption. So that's why CO2 emissions will be more. So if you lower down population, most definitely your CO2 emissions will also lower down. But this is a quite sensitive topic because not many countries can actually have that policy to control population. So you cannot have a general policy that you can also limit how many children you have or what to do with your life in general. But of course, there are some exceptions. Maybe, for example, an example is what happened for a one-child policy in China previously, and that could possibly be a good way of limiting some population changes. But I think that policy has been scrapped already. But expectedly, this is not an easy thing to deal with most of the nations. And so the expected stabilization of the population is around 10 billion after 2050. So with regards to controlling the population, we can possibly not include this one as a major approach to CO2 emission reduction. So the next one would be GDP per population, or the money or the wealth or the affluence of the nation, or how wealthy is the nation. So it refers to the average consumption of each person in the population, how much energy and how much money they have in the population. So of course, if you have higher GDP per population, that means your country is more wealthy. And if we want to reduce this one, it means that, in fact, if you reduce the GDP per capita, then you're actually saying that they should lower their standard of living, which is, in most cases, is not desirable in many countries, especially if we compare developing versus developing and underdeveloped countries versus developed countries. For underdeveloped countries, they want to increase to have a better economy, right? So you cannot just tell them, okay, you have to reduce your standard of living, you have to reduce your economy so that we can reduce our CO2 emissions. And I think that could be possible for developed countries because they have reached already a level of comfort and a better standard of living. But still, this is not an easy thing to do. But for underdeveloped countries, that would be something that is not going to be welcome at all because of their need to provide a better life for the people as well. So these two may be a little bit of not an easy task to deal with as a way of approach to reduce CO2 emissions. Now come in most cases, the last two terms, which is energy per GDP and CO2 emissions per GDP, we call this energy per GDP as energy intensity, and CO2 emissions per energy is what we call as the emissions intensity as well. So this is like the energy intensity and the carbon intensity, for example. So this is not emissions intensity, but a carbon intensity. So energy per GDP is actually refers to the total energy consumption per unit of GDP, or how much energy is used to make money or for the economy. All right. So if more people are working, for example, based on labor services, then they use lower cost of converting this energy into money. Thus, their energy per GDP or their energy intensity is lower. If you compare that to a country where there are more industries, for example, manufacturing industries, then that results to a much higher energy intensity. So for energy intensity, it's different for various countries, all right, and it's affected by many factors like climate. Climate it has, like if the more severe weather conditions a country has, it means they have a higher energy need for consumption because they need it for heating, probably for cooling as well. And another factor is the general standards of living. So the availability of energy efficiency measures and better efficiency and energy savings devices as well, and also policies, also affect the overall energy intensity of a nation. Like for example, if one has, the more available, more efficient appliances and of heating and cooling systems or more fuel efficient cars, this kind of country will have a reduced energy intensity because they are more efficient. However, one must take note of what we call as a rebound effect. So the rebound effect is, it's highly possible that the lower cost of energy through efficiency improvements will result to people to add more activities because they are perceiving to have to be saving cost because of the energy efficiency. Thus, these additional activities in most likely will add more emissions. Exactly, they can add more emissions to perhaps because due to the added activities that ultimately offsets the supposedly saved cost due to efficiency. So instead of actually saving the energy, people are trying to add more activities, and that's resulting to more energy actually being used. So that's the rebound effect, and that's a problem when we think about more efficient technologies because that could result in that kind of behavior. So in order to do that, if you have these energy efficiency approaches and energy conservation, for example, then a change of behavior is important. Okay, they should not look for more because of the perceived savings due to the more efficient technology. For carbon intensity, for this one, the carbon emissions per energy is what we call as carbon intensity. This is basically driven by the kind of energy production in specific area. So for example, this is the amount of CO2 emitted per unit of energy consumed. And if we look at our examples before, this is basically referring to the energy production that we have now, which is based on fossil fuel energy. And fossil fuels is a lot of carbon, is a carbon-based energy source. So that's why right now, because of that, the CO2 emissions is quite enormous. So that's why in most countries are now transitioning to a low carbon energy economy. All right. So they are trying to see some low carbon sources of energy or new energy technologies. This is also the main approach for the global reduction of emissions as guided by IPCC. This is where the focus of our lectures will be in this class, in trying to understand the various renewable energy technologies. So the low carbon economy or low carbon sources would probably refer more on renewable energy technologies like solar energy, wind energy. We also have biomass even. Biomass could be considered as renewable, and also some other combinations of these technologies to meet the desired reduction in CO2 emissions. All right. So we have to use or at least make use of the Kaya identity in general to make it as a guide for us on which aspect or which term we should focus on reducing our CO2 emissions. All right. So please remember this term as a Kaya identity for the reduction of CO2 as an approach for reduction of CO2.